So this is the shirt I'm going to show you how to dye today. I'm going to give you my secret recipe, how much dye to mix for each color. So there's the green, the aqua, and the purple, and I'm going to explain to you exactly how those get mixed up. I got interested in it because a friend of mine dragged me literally to a artist talk, and I didn't want to go because I'd rather be doing anything else besides that. Don't tell anyone. And I went to the talk, and it was a quilter that was doing the talk, and she had painted some of her fabric, and it just had a beautiful look to it. So I asked her what technique she used, and she said that she thickened up the dyes with sodium alginate and then painted it on like a painting. And I was so curious about it that it took me a year to actually buy all the supplies and do it, and to sit down and read exactly how to do it. But once I started doing it, I couldn't stop. So I'm just going to quickly go over the supplies that you need. There's not too many. The dyes, the most important thing probably. I always buy these Procyon MX dyes, and they're by Jacquard company. It doesn't say it on here for some reason, but that's who makes those. And these dyes, they come in the big container, which I buy the colors that I use a lot in the bigger container because it ends up being a little less expensive. And then I buy the smaller size for the colors that I don't use as often. These colors are superior, I think, to any other dyes that are out there. That's why I use them. I've tried other dyes. They're not as beautiful and brilliant as these. So those are the ones I would recommend. The other things you need are the brushes, of course, plastic container. I use measuring cups and measuring spoons that are just specifically for my artwork. I don't mix them with food, and I don't recommend that you do that either. So I have a set that I use just for this. Then I have the sodium alginate. This is what thickens up the dyes. It comes in this powder form that looks kind of like raw sugar. And this is the big container. You can also get it in a really small container. And then this is soda ash, which is used for dyeing, and I get the big one because I use so much of it. This is actually a plastic drop cloth that comes in a little roll that you can buy at Home Depot or anywhere else, probably a painting store. And then this is also plastic, but it's the 6mm thick plastic that I use to make my pattern, which I'll show you how to do that. And then a whisk. I use a whisk. And again, I would only use a whisk that you're not going to use with food later. Before you start, you do have to soak the shirt in soda ash. The soda ash will activate the dyes. The reason I like soaking the shirt first is because you can soak it, let it dry, and then dye it anytime you want. You don't have to, it's not time sensitive. The soda ash will just remain dormant until you put the dyes on it, and then it activates the soda ash. So the way to mix up the soda ash, depending on how big the item is that you're soaking, now for a t-shirt or even 2 t-shirts, you could use 1 gallon of hot water. I just run hot water from the faucet. I don't boil it. And that's hot enough. And then 1 cup of the soda ash, but you have to dissolve it. You have to keep stirring it until it dissolves completely. I put my hand into the bucket just to see if it's dissolved. It is sort of irritating to the skin a little bit, so you might want to use a glove or something. I don't use a glove, but you can if you feel like you need to. The other thing that's good to mix up at the same time is the sodium alginate, which comes in this bag. And the recipe for the sodium alginate is 1 cup boiling water. And I put it into this container, or a container like this. And then I put the water in first, and then I sprinkle 1 tablespoon of the sodium alginate into the water. And then I use a whisk and I stir it up. And then it becomes just like this kind of very jello-y. Now, sodium alginate is actually sea kelp. That's what it is. And it smells like it. It smells just like the ocean. So for this project, I mixed up 3 cups water, 3 tablespoons sodium alginate, so that I would have enough. Now, I do have some left over after I mixed my dyes. These are the dyes. You don't want to mix the dyes until your t-shirt is dry and ready to go. You want to soak it the day before, let it dry. I just hang it up in the bathroom or outside or whatever, wherever. Let it dry, and then when you're ready to use the dyes, you want to mix the dyes up right when you're ready to use them. They have a little bit of a life, but they don't have a long life. They are really lose their strength after about 48 hours. So I mixed these up yesterday because I did part of the painting yesterday that I'm going to show you. So they're still okay today, but by tomorrow I wouldn't probably want to be using them anymore. So the dyes, when you're mixing up the dyes, for this particular shirt, what I used was, for the aqua color, this is the aqua color, and this is how thick you want it to be. It's sort of like molasses or honey. And you can always add more water into it. The way I mix it up that I find works best for me is I pour a little bit of hot boiling water into my plastic container, and then I sprinkle the dye over that and mix the dye with my brush. I like to dissolve the dye before I put the sodium alginate in there. So for this shirt, the amount that I mixed was, I poured a little water in there. If I had to give you an amount, I would say it was about 3 tablespoons of hot boiling water. Then for the aqua dye, I used 3 teaspoons of the aqua dye that I just showed you in the big container. And then I put a half a cup of the sodium alginate like this, already mixed, ready to go. Once you mix the sodium alginate, you want to let it sit for about 4 hours. So you can use this the next day. It doesn't have a shelf life. It does, I have to say, smell after a couple of weeks. It smells really bad. So you want to use it in 2 weeks or, time, something like that. So the recipe for the aqua is half a cup sodium alginate like this and 3 teaspoons of the dye. Then for the green color, I used 2 tablespoons of the sodium alginate, and then I used 3/4 of a teaspoon of the dye. And then for the centers, the purple centers, I used 1 tablespoon of sodium alginate and then 3/8 of a teaspoon of the dye. And then what you have to mix it for quite a while. I use a whisk, like for this larger the larger amount. I use a whisk to try to whisk everything together, because it takes a little while to get everything incorporated all together. And I do also find that certain colors don't mix up as smoothly as other colors. Like this green color, for some reason, it's always lumpy. It doesn't seem to get smooth. I'm not sure why. It must be the ingredients. So that's what you want to prepare. Soda ash, soak first, hang up the t-shirt, let it dry, mix the sodium alginate, and let that sit for, at least a couple hours, but best overnight. But really, if it sits for 4 hours, it's ready to use. Once the shirt is dry, or whatever you're painting, then mix up the dyes. Do the dyes last. Those are the last minute. So I'm going to show you how I make the pattern that goes inside of the shirt, because we don't want the dye to seep through to the other side. So originally when I started doing this, I was just using this, this is a drop cloth. It's really thin plastic, and I do use it to cover the item that I'm dyeing. But to make the pattern, You need something that's a little sturdier. I only use this because I do this quite a bit. You might want to use something else, you know, if you don't want to buy the whole roll of this thick plastic. So this is just a sample piece just to show you how I trace the pattern onto the plastic. You would need a piece that's the size of the shirt or actually a little bit bigger. And what I do is I just put it like this over the shirt, and then I just take a Sharpie and I actually just outline the shirt. When you're outlining the shirt though, when you come up to this neck area and then the area by the sleeves, you do want to extend the plastic a little longer so that it sticks out of the sleeve and sticks out of the neck. It'll just make the painting that much easier. And I'll show you exactly what I mean because I just happen to have one already cut out, and here it is. So because I've been doing this quite a bit, I label this. Of course, I can't read my own writing here. It says large t-shirt. So that way I know, okay, this is the pattern for a large t-shirt. So I'm gonna just insert this into the shirt like this. And so I cut the neck a little bigger. And I'm pulling the sleeves through, cut the sleeves longer like this. Oh, and this is just so nice to paint with. It makes it so much easier than using something that's flimsy. So this is perfect because it's flexible, so you can roll it up and it keeps the dye from seeping through. Now, honestly, if you painted this without something inside, you probably would be okay. It may not seep all the way through, but I like doing it just in case. So you have that option. I'm laying it out on the drop cloth plastic, and then I'm going to, as I'm painting this, I have this plastic rolled up like this. And as I'm painting it, I'm gonna cover it like this. And it's kind of nice because then I can put my dyes on here as I'm going along. And I can also lean on this. And as I get up to the top, I just roll this up. Now the reason for the plastic, why you need this, is it has to stay wet for at least 24 hours for the dye to really set into the shirt. So that's the purpose of this. So once I paint it, I just unroll it and then I roll this up like this. And then you just leave it just like this for 24 hours or longer. And then it just does its own thing. So here's the shirt that I'm dyeing. Really excited because it looks awesome so far. So I did this last night and it's covered because it has to be wet. So that's the other thing. You can put it away and continue it the next day, which is so great. It will still have to sit for 24 hours though, so that both sides get the full exposure that they need. So I want to show you how to flip this over. This is all covered with a plastic, as you can see, and I'm going to flip it over and then I'm going to paint the other side of it. I just wanted to give you a couple of tips as far as what makes it look really good. One thing is I always paint the underside of the sleeve here because when you have the shirt on, you can see the white underneath, and I personally don't like it to show white. So I always paint the underside. The other thing that's a little tricky, that'll feel kind of sloppy when you're doing it, but it always comes out really, really nice, is the seam on the side. If there's a seam on the side and underneath the arm there, it can get a little bit crumpled up. You just extend it. Don't be afraid to touch it. I don't wear gloves. I don't mind that my hands are dirty. If you do, you can wear gloves, or after you're done, actually, if you spray bleach on your hands, it'll come off. It does, the dye comes off. So I try to paint the seam, and I really want to get into the seam because you don't want to have a white line in there. So I always double check. See, I can see that I didn't fully do it. I'll do it when I flip it over. I want to paint that because you definitely don't want those white lines in there. So you check on both sides and the underside of that. So you cover that up, and then I'm going to flip this over. And of course, having the plastic on there makes it so easy to flip it over. So I flip it over, and then I have my plastic rolled up like this. But actually, I want it to go like this so that I can unroll it this way. As I'm working on it, I want to be able to unroll it and cover the part that I'm painting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do these seams. I'm going to paint these seams in here because I noticed that they're not perfect, and I want it perfect. So after this has been sitting for 24 hours, 48 hours, you can leave it for a week if you want to, you need to rinse it out. The rinsing takes a little bit of time. You can do it in the washing machine. I rinse it first. I fill a plastic tub with cold water, and then I put the shirt or whatever in there and let it soak for about 20 minutes in the cold water. That stops the dyeing process. So that way the dye doesn't travel to white areas, if you have white areas. Then once it's been soaking, and you'll notice the sodium alginate is like jello in there, so you'll notice it's all coming loose and coming off. Then you rinse it in hot water, and I rinse it really until the dye stops coming out. You can wash it in the washing machine too. I would rinse it first in the sink several times before putting it into the washing machine. I did put a few things into the washing machine after I had rinsed them, and then the next day I washed some towels, and the towels came out the same color as my dyed thing. So I don't know if I would recommend using the washing machine, or maybe go to a laundromat and use a laundromat washing machine. So once you rinse it out, it doesn't really continue coming out once it's been washed several times. The dye stops coming out, and then it just keeps its color so well, this particular dye. So that's it. So I hope that you try it because it is so much fun to do. So here are some tips. One is keep really accurate notes. When you're mixing up the dye, if you're anything like me, I get so excited about it. I think, oh, I'll remember how to do this, how much I used. I don't remember anything. So as I'm doing it, I have a piece of paper, I write everything down. Half a cup of this, a tablespoon of this. Write it all down because later you'll be so happy that you did it. I also did these little sample swatches here. They're time consuming to do, but in the end, it's great to have this to refer to. And I have notes on all of these. So I have this one and this one. These are all the colors that I had on hand, and I just wanted to see how they looked on this particular fabric. The first thing that I dyed was a set of sheets because I couldn't find any sheets that I liked. And when I remembered this technique, I thought, oh my gosh, I could buy a white set of sheets and then dye them however I want. So here are my gorgeous sheets. Check this out. So this is the top sheet. Look at this. Isn't this awesome? Look at these colors. Look at these awesome colors. So these are my pillowcases and my sheets. I even painted a duvet cover. That's what this is. When I painted the duvet cover, I painted this exactly the way I showed you the shirt, but I put a drop cloth inside of this to keep it from touching. So I painted those, and I'm so happy with those. I love them every time I get into bed. And then I wanted to show you this. This was a shirt, a turtleneck that I dyed. I bought a white turtleneck. I dyed it, and I hated it. I hated it. I dyed it like an aqua color, but for some reason the dye would not take to the shirt. I'm not sure why. So I thought, I'm going to get rid of this anyway. I hate it so much. I'm going to just color it up with my new technique. And I love it, except you always want to make sure that you mix enough dye. So yeah, you don't want to end up with this. Of course, I just wear this for biking or whatever, but I ran out right at the end. Can you believe this? So I had to remix. This is actually the same color, but it was like a different dye lot, and it came out a different color. So, oops.